Welcome to Divine Couples. Your host, Naomi Slater, will awaken your passion, deepen your intimacy, and invite healing into your relationships, working towards accessing higher levels of consciousness in all areas of your life. Come with us on this journey to explore and experience your fullest potential.
You are listening to Society Bites Radio, social interaction for the mind and soul. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Naomi Slater, and you have tuned in to Divine Couples, adding intimacy, passion, and healing to your lives. MARLEE LISS helps women claim sacred sensuality so they can live in self-love and inner wholeness. As a women's embodiment coach, author, public speaker, and retreat facilitator, she has worked internationally to inspire transformative healing. MARLEE's work is deeply shaped by her background in social work, trauma-informed yoga, somatic sex education, and body image facilitation. In 2019, MARLEE founded an organization called Rehumanize, focused on uplifting cultural standards of empathy. MARLEE has shared her story of restorative justice for sexual violence worldwide, and her work has been featured in Forbes, HuffPost, BuzzFeed, Mel Robbins Show, and more. Hey, MARLEE, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Our pleasure. So, MARLEE, you are a sexual embodiment coach. Can you tell us what that means?
Yes, so I work with women all over the world who are looking to reclaim their sexual empowerment, their sensual connection. So on a very basic level, this means coming as far out of dissociation as possible and really coming deep into the body, remembering the pleasure that lives there and just finding so much self-love through that.
That sounds so wonderful. Pleasure, self-love. Do you feel that a lot of people are kind of disconnected from that?
Definitely. I think that everyone is. And a lot of the people I work with are people who have been through sexual trauma. But something I also say is that as a culture, we're quite sexually traumatized. Most of us are living in a state of dissociation or self-resentment with all the media messages and crap that we receive. So I definitely think that self-love is a path that is meant for all of us to walk and reclaim.
Agreed. So you have a very unique and powerful story, and I would love if you could tell us about what brought you to do what you do.
Yeah, so the biggest catalyst in my journey for me doing this work now is that I experienced sexual assault in 2016. I was raped by a stranger, and this, of course, sent me on like the biggest dark night of the soul I had experienced. I went really, really low into depression and PTSD, and I just started questioning everything I'd been taught around being a woman and how we treat one another as human beings, all of this. So it was a huge, huge, huge journey of descent and rising for me, and sexual empowerment played a huge role in that. Teachings like tantra and somatic healing, learning to feel safe in my body, all of this was really essential to my survival and eventually to my thriving. But the story that I've shared internationally again and again is that I actually became the first sexual assault case in North America to conclude with restorative justice. So this means that I fought for my assailant to go to therapy, and eventually we met in an 8-hour healing circle rather than proceeding to criminal trial.
Wow, that's first of all, I'm so sorry that you went through what you went through. I can't imagine what's that like. What something like that does to a person's soul and heart. But it is so clear to me that you went through this in order to help other women transform and to empower other women into developing a self-love practice and to reclaim their divine feminine. So although your story, started out in a very traumatic and sad way, what you've done with it, in my opinion, and I think in really everybody's opinion, is really just unbelievably brave, and so happy that you're doing this work. Can you maybe talk to a little bit of, when after you went through this experience, what brought you to Tantra and to somatic healing? Kind of what was your process there?
Mm, great question. And thank you for those reflections.
Mm,
What brought me there? So I kind of entered this journey of healing that was pretty much do or die. Like I was really in that state of so much grief that I was considering taking my life. And the alternative to that was to really immerse myself in healing. And what's important to note is that I was already connected with yoga. I had already experienced living on an ashram. Like I was really deep in spiritual teachings already. But
mhm.
something that I'd never been taught was an embodied approach to spirituality, one that really focused on me feeling safe as a human in this reality, me feeling safe within intimacy, me feeling powerful within my own body. And when I realized that, it was just very clear to me that this is where the majority of the healing was for me. And I started to find spaces where people were ending that dissonance and really acknowledging that we're doing the healing here on the ground as human beings. And that means that we have to find the sacredness, the beauty, the safety within our own bodies first and foremost. So Tantra really helped me to bridge the dissonance I had between the sort of like ethereal and the physical.
Yeah, I mean, of course, my experience was quite different than yours, but that, Tantra did essentially the same thing for me. I also spent quite a bit of time in ashrams and learning from gurus and meditating and practicing yoga. I've been a yoga teacher for the past 15 years, but Tantra did just that. It really created this embodiment. And working with emotional alchemy for me has been a very, very powerful tool to release, different traumas that we all have. Nobody is trauma free. Of course, there are different levels to trauma, but yes, Tantra is really the path of embodiment. So totally agree with you. You kind of spoke, about this restorative justice. You kind of walked through it super quickly, but really what happened there, this was a moment in history, um, where this was the first time essentially that a case like this used restorative justice, which is a theory of justice that emphasizes repairing the harm caused by criminal behavior and not just persecution. So, do you think that this is a better way to deal with rape, and why?
It's a big question. On one level, or I guess what I always preface this with is I know that this is not the path for everyone, and not everybody's perpetrator is necessarily going to take accountability in the same way that mine did.
Hmm.
But I think that the amount of people who will thrive in this process is way higher than we think it is. Like way more people can really, really transform through this. So I think that this is the most powerful way for us to actually end the cycle of violence
Hmm.
versus drawing it out. My feeling is that through the punitive system, victims are being re traumatized. Perpetrators are either being acquitted, like let off without any sort of justice, or they are being incarcerated, in which case they're immersed in a culture of a lot of violence and isolation and things that lead to more and usually to reoffending. So to me, restorative justice is a way to finally break that, say, hey, why does this actually happen? And what kind of supports and resources and healing do we need to bring in to make sure that it doesn't happen again?
You are so wise. And it kind of begs the question. I think when a lot of women seek, persecution, they're also in some way, I mean, of course, they don't want this to happen to other women. I'm sure that's part of what, motivates them. But I think it probably also has something to do with them also seeking their own healing, and maybe them thinking that, persecuting their perpetrator will help them heal. So I'm curious to ask you, how did seeking restorative justice help you in your healing process? Did it at all? How did that kind of feel for you?
Yeah, I love the framing of that question because I think it really speaks to the way that we've been taught to focus so much on the person who hurt us. Like whatever the situation is, we're taught to be like, what do they deserve? What kind of punishment should they receive? What do they need? Or even sometimes victims take on the responsibility of like trying to make sure that the person doesn't reoffend. But actually, what I did here was I really focused on my own needs, on my own healing. And part of that meant that it was very important to me that he transforms, that he gets the support that he needs in order to break the cycle of violence he was creating. But first and foremost, like I focused on my own needs and on just seeing the parts of me that felt really broken and really hurt, and tending to those parts meant like I had a need to hear him take ownership. I had a need for him to see me cry and to really understand the pain that he caused me. And that the result of that was that both of us got to heal. It wasn't like an either or, it was this really powerful process of both of us healing.
That is so, it's just so incredible that you were strong enough and brave enough to go through that process. And I had a conversation this morning, really coincidentally, with my husband, and he's finishing up a course that he did, for Tantra for men. And part of what they were learning about was, when people do things, when they have sort of like sexual fetishes, negative ones, I'm not talking about, just kind of regular fantasies. It has to do with something in their inner child that didn't receive what they needed to receive. And I asked him, okay, so what does that mean about somebody who then, rapes? And he said what it means is that they didn't receive love as a child, and their inner child is trying to claim that love like a child would, like to snatch it away from somebody because they didn't receive it as a child. So that was kind of interesting for me just to kind of reflect on. I wonder what you think about that.
I think that's so powerful, and it's just real. The reality is that no one hurts anyone else unless they themselves are deeply wounded. It's the classic, like, hurt people. And I forget where I read this, but it was a line that said, when someone commits violence, it is almost always not the first time they've been around violence, right? Like they've already normalized that within their system. And I want to be very clear, like, this is not me excusing behavior or justifying behavior. I think that sexual assault is never, never, never okay. And I'm acknowledging that it happens for a reason. Like, why is the person doing that? What have they been taught within their culture that's allowed them to see them as normal? And like you're saying, what have they felt or lacked within themselves, maybe within their families, that is making them take in this really desperate and violent way?
Yeah, agreed. And thank you for adding that, because of course I'm not trying to justify any sort of sexual violence. I'm really just trying to examine it and understand it, because that's essentially what you did by seeking restorative justice. So how did you turn this incredible pain into purpose?
Yeah, I almost feel like it happened slowly along the way. At first, I was doing all of this healing work and I was immersing myself so deeply in Tantra and everything for myself, for my own healing. And then at some point, it just became my love, my passion, my new norm and reality. It's where I connected with so much community, and